Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Butterfly Effect. We have a special guest today, Dr. Kenneth Davis. He has some background in the criminal justice system, and we're going to be talking to him today about youth violence and, really just the things that plague the neighborhoods and all that type of stuff. So real informal. So Ken, if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about your background in the criminal justice system. I know I met you through, you were actually one of my instructors. A lot of people don't know, but I do have a degree in criminal justice. I actually did that because my job at the time, we were doing a lot of investigation and all that kind of stuff. So they thought it would be good to just go ahead and get a degree. But I had met Ken as an instructor, and over the course of time, he was my mentor at maybe about 5-6 years. Trying to progress my career as well, but brought him in today because he deals a lot in the community with Edward Waters University now, because it used to be Edward Waters College. That's an HBCU here. So he can kind of fill in on some of the things that he's been seeing throughout his career.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Just a little bit background. I have about 15 years working in criminal justice as a practitioner. I was a deputy sheriff in Fulton County, which is Atlanta, Georgia. I've worked as a campus police officer, training sergeant at Georgia Tech University in Atlanta. And then when I moved to Florida, I became a probation officer. I did community control, drug offender probation, different aspects of community supervision. So when I left there, I was always a part-time instructor once I got my master's degree in criminal justice. But eventually I left and became a full-time professor and a program director of criminal justice. I've worked at several institutions, currently at Edward Waters University, where I'm associate professor of criminal justice. I study crime. I study the causes of crime. And try to offer solutions. I've spoke for FFCJ, which is our local state college, on the crime rates increasing in the city of Jacksonville. I've did several articles on that. So my background is varied, but it's focused mainly on criminal justice, the causes of crime.
So just to kind of touch base, so our podcast kind of deals a lot with the mentality of a person, mental state, and of course how that spills over into relationships with people. We've been focusing a lot on mental health, but we want to kind of tie in the fact that when you're talking about crime, you're talking about a vast majority of the population is actually, 25 and younger when it comes to the black community. There's a lot of youth who, if you scroll through social media, if you talk to people, they can say that, they're just happy to reach age 18, and don't think that they're, given their circumstances, they don't even think that they can be able to make it to the age of 21. If you can just kind of touch on what you've seen in your career, and also, as mentoring with different individuals, like what do you feel like is like some of the main causes of crime within that particular age group?
Well, I think it's a very complex question. And if I had, all of the answers, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. I'd be in Dubai somewhere.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's a complex question. but you can break it down into micro groups. And when you start talking about, for example, a lot of times we talk about youth violence, we have to clarify what we're talking about. We're talking about, in the minority communities, in the inner city, in rural areas. Are we talking about like gun violence, like with school shooters? It's a lot of different variations, but just in general with young people, a lot of it has to do with social status and subcultures within that community that contribute to one willing to engage in something that's either going to, end them up in prison or, end them up dead. Right. So it's a lot of complex issues that go into that, such as lack of parenting, lack of supervision, lack of opportunities, or their perception of opportunities. They feel like they're not going to be anything, or they're not going to make it. So why not just go and rob this store, or go jack this drug dealer and try to come up, not thinking about if it goes wrong. Right, what would happen? What's going to happen? Yeah. People never think they're going to get caught. Also, think they're invincible, and I definitely don't want to blame things on one of those people who blame things on music and television, but it plays a role. Right. Everything plays a role. Right. There's no one silver bullet, but it all plays a role, and it creates a culture where the youth now are more, they have more access to guns, right? Violence has always been around. Right. It's no different from back in the 70s, 80s. People were always getting in altercations. They just was fist fighting. Fist fighting. Then it graduated from fist fighting to knives, and then guns. So you did say something pretty key where you said lack of supervision. How much do you feel that a single parent households contribute to some of the? I think it contributes a lot. That's not saying that a single parent can't properly supervise their child, but we have to be, honest with ourselves, and we have to look at, what does it take to be a single parent? If you're trying to provide, that means that you're working. Right. If you're getting off of work at 5, you're stuck in traffic for an hour, you're not getting home to 6 o'clock. What time do high school kids get home? Yeah, right? Early, 2:30, 3 o'clock. What are they doing for those 2 or 3 hours? Are they in some after school program? Are they at home just chilling, watching TV? What are they doing? Right? Who are their friends? And a lot of times when their parents get home, they have to cook, prepare for work the next day. Some of them have to come home, and some of them have to go to a second job, right, to try to prepare. So to try to provide for the family. So a 2-parent household provides a better, you would think would provide more stability, but that's not always the case either. But generally speaking, that provides more of an opening for the youth to get involved when you have a parent that's working, that's trying to provide. Very few parents are like, hey, Junior, I want you to be in a gang like me. Right. They don't endorse it. Right. But the lack of supervision, and that person, that youth being, available for the gangs to recruit, for his friends to, put peer pressure on him or her, is what drives, a lot of those behaviors when I say lack of supervision. Right. So you spoke about like gangs and stuff like that. People tend to think that that's like a inner city problem and issue. You've been to Atlanta, then, here in Northeast Florida. So do you feel like, that's kind of like an understatement when it comes to, or is it just like something on TV where they just hype up in those inner cities and it still is an issue? Well, in some places, gangs are really a big problem. Some places not so much, but people have different names for gangs, right? One of the biggest gangs, I always tell people, police, one of the biggest gangs, that's a different story. But
Right.
really just a group of people, that are involved in any type of criminal activity. Well, you call it a gang, a clique. A lot of people don't label themselves in a gang, but technically they're performing as a gang.
Right.
So some places, you have your titles, the big gangs we know, the Blood, the Crips, the GDs.
That, yeah.
But if it's just a group of neighborhood kids and they're committing crimes together, that's technically a gang, right? They're sticking together. They're not letting anybody from the other neighborhood come in and bother them. If, the old saying, you jump my friend, you got to jump me, I'm jumping in. So, it functions that way. It's just any group of kids or adults, young adults that are, socialized together. They tend to perform, as what we would consider a gang. Mm-hmm. But in some places, gangs are really organized. But gangs are not what a lot of people think they are. A lot of gangs now, they're moving away from violence. They're getting into organized crime, fraud, more different types of prostitution. They're getting into legalized marijuana. Because they're looking at it as a financial opportunity,
Right.
So they're not really out here. They don't want attention to them,
Right, because how many houses you got to break into to be able to have something, to make the money of something
$10,000
like that.
credit card fraud case get you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an issue, but it's a result. It's a result. And I would just like to say that generally gangs in urban areas and inside of what we consider ghettos, they're generally there by design. So what happens is when the government and the cities group a whole bunch of poor people together, and strip them of resources, strip them of dignity, and these people see no way out, they tend to form groups to survive. And that's how gangs started. So, and that's how they still start. It's people coming together saying, hey, stick with me. I'm going to show you the way. And it's like family. A lot of people say, why would somebody join a gang? It's because they feel like the gang is their family.
Right.
As twisted as that may seem, to that individual, that's why they loyal to that gang.
Yeah, sometimes it's like power and numbers as well, because a lot of situations when it comes to, like you said, the poor people, it's kind of how like the projects and stuff started, where they, just kind of group everybody all at once in one location. It is like a sense of you don't have something, where can I get it? And then, that I can't necessarily say it's a false sense of protection, because depending on what it is that you need to be protected from, that they can actually probably do provide, what their level of protection would be. When it comes to like the kids and it's being so, everything has kind of switched over to seeing more, wanting more when it comes to like social media and stuff like that. Like you said, you got the kids who are home more, 3-4 hours before their parents even get home. You got the influence that comes from inside, even like a little rivalry, here in Jacksonville, Reigns, Reebok, all that kind of stuff. It's like a status, no one wants to be left behind. So I know some of the crime kind of starts with just the small things to fit in. But as a parent, like, what do you do in a situation to where, you're not around your child as much as they're in school and or, on TV or the internet? Like, some people think that the schools are not that good when it comes to helping out the situation. I know growing up, we had a lot of after-school activities and stuff like that, but I do notice that now there's not as much that's geared towards the development of kids. It's more like I don't say like a babysitting type situation, but it's almost just like bodies are there, but there's nothing positive necessarily outside of just the sports in the school systems, unless it's things that's going on that maybe the parents don't know about. I'm not really for sure, but that's kind of what I ran into with my kids. They're grown now, but I ran into my kids to where it was only a little bit to do after school, you know.
I think, yeah, that's really important. The kids having something to do, but I think it starts before that. It starts with your kids having self-esteem, because self-esteem means a lot. When the kids have low self-esteem, they're willing to succumb to peer pressure a lot quicker. They're looking to gain respect of their peers, admiration from their peers, and they do that by trying to fit in. And fitting in is what's perceived as what's good at that moment. Right. So at that moment, if they're talking about sex, then they want to have sex. They're talking about being in the gang, they want to be in the gang. They're talking about doing drugs, they want to do drugs. So they're just trying to fit in, and they're experimenting. But when they have low self-esteem, it really opens a door for a lot of these other vices to come in. But you have to build up the esteem in the child. Now, I'm not gonna bash the school system, but I'm finna bash the school system.
Okay.
So the school system is almost like we're herding cattle now. Right. I mean, they just have the kids and they're going from one class to the next. It's like babies. COVID showed us that school has turned into a big babysitting job, right, for society in general. The students are not getting the structure that they need from the school system. So I think as parents, we have to step in and assess the individual needs of our child. If you have multiple kids, I have multiple kids, you have multiple kids, every child is not the same. Correct. So some child may need more self-esteem building. Some child may be more independent, right? And they may need to be challenged more. So as a parent, you have to kind of assess your individual kids and see what they need and try to provide it. But remember, I said earlier, mama is working. She don't get off the 5.
She don't get out till 5.
She don't get off the 5.
Yeah.
And then she may have to pick up an afternoon job from 6 to 10, driving an Uber or something to pay that rent, because rent went from, 1,000 to now 1,500. Right. So, I mean, these are the real life situations that lead to this type of thing. And the school system, like I said, generally speaking, it's so much pressure on these teachers, to pass these students, to have these students do well on these tests. Right. Right. That it becomes they're chasing the test. And people say they're teaching to the test. So they don't get a lot of time to spend on social skills, leadership skills. So students who have the advantage are generally students who are in a quality school where they have quality curriculum. The class sizes are smaller. Yeah. And they have a lot of extracurricular activities for the kids. And their parents is involved in that whole process. Right. So those are the things that generally in a perfect world that would help your child be successful. But ultimately, it still comes back to some form of personal accountability for that individual child, because some parents do everything they think is right or by the book, and that child still goes, a different road. And that happens. And I think we have to have those conversations also, because a lot of times parents are ashamed to talk about those tough, parenting situations. And, a lot of times people try to hide what's really going on. But it's natural for, if you have 4 or 5 kids, that, you could be the best parent in the world. Somebody's not going to follow the routine.
Probably the middle child.
so it's a lot of challenges. Yeah, it's
as far as we kind of discussed on some of the other shows about traumas too with the parent. being unskilled in certain areas when it comes to parenting, only doing what it is that they knew to do, which we know sometimes, back in the day, teaching and upbringing wasn't, it was beat you to do whatever, and that's not always the right way of handling things. But a lot of parents, they know what they know, and they don't realize that, like you said, every child is different, every situation is different, times are different. So you can't always go at something the same way, thinking that, okay, well, I turned out all right, then, they just hard-headed, they're just whatever. I feel like that's kind of key, along with some of the new developments with maybe some of the behavioral problems with kids in school. I didn't ever, I could be wrong, but I don't remember anybody ever being autistic or now hyper, like the ADHD. Yeah, I had a cousin that was like always into something, but that was in the era when they first started medicating and not really, and then they'll put you in a class that secludes you as if you're like slow or whatever, when that's not really the right thing to be able to do. But I think a lot of times when you're talking about like parenting and doing what how do you know as a parent that it's not effective because the way they're doing it versus this child is a special child that needs additional help outside of?
Well, I think first I like to say that America basically has a mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. We've always had a mental health crisis. We just didn't know it. Right. Now people are starting to realize what mental health is, and the stigmas are coming off of it. We had kids back when I was in school that were all the same behaviors that you have now, that people are labeling bipolar, ADHD. We've had all of those kids when I was growing. We just didn't call them that.
Right.
And the teacher would just whoop them with the belt or the ruler. Right. Things was a little bit different. So
sit them outside in the hallway.
Yeah, it was. I can tell you some stories. Yeah. But they were doing the best they could at the time based off of the information they had and what they thought was best practice. So the intentions were good, right? May not have been effective,
right?
Or, it may have been effective. We don't, some of them turned out to be okay. But, times have changed. People have more access to data, research, and they can look and see what works, what doesn't work. And I think part of the problem that you brought up with the parents, there's no manual to parenting.
Right.
You don't, most people don't actually read parenting books. Most people have kids and they figure it out based off of the way they was raised, their values. So there's no manual for it. But when you deal with your child, first, sometimes you have to deal with yourself, because a lot of the parents suffering from trauma, broken homes, broken relationships. They don't have a father figure around, so they don't have anybody to emulate those relationships. So they basically just make it up as they go, and that can impact the child. Right. A learning curve, with a child can be steep. So you're learning how to parent. For most of us that have multiple kids, I think most of us think we did better on the second one than we did on the first one, because you've learned a lot from being a parent. But I think that there are resources. A lot of times we have to acknowledge that there is a problem.
Right.
And a lot of times we don't want, especially in our community, minority community, we don't like to label our kids, right? Because we think that label is going to stick with them throughout, their lifetime. So there are resources, and now most insurance companies, and that's another issue why I say it's a mental health crisis. The biggest problem with mental health treatment is who's going to pay for it.
Right.
And
Because that's not considered a necessity in the eyes of a person who has to make a choice of, are we going to eat or are we going to get mental health treatment?
So now some insurance companies are including that in their policies, mental health treatment. Also, too, at most employers now, when you have like the EAP programs, you can actually have counseling sessions for family members that are not in the house. So if you have a cousin that's not living with you, that's a teenager that's going through some problems, depression or some issues, they can actually get counseling. So the reach of mental health treatment is expanding, but it has a long way to go. But generally, I tell parents, start with your employer, see what's in your health insurance policy. And a lot of the EAP counseling sessions, that's not in your health insurance. That's separate from your health insurance. So you get that free whether you got the health insurance or not.
Yeah.
Yes. And also look at the school. The school in your school district, the counselors there are going to have resources that are local, because the resources that you have in Duval County are probably going to be different than you have in St. John's and Flagler. They're going to have the local resources. So those are the places you look for the resources. But I think it's important that you recognize that if your child is not performing at optimal level and it could be something wrong, is that you start trying to evaluate to see what type of help they need, and start with your counselors.
And how, I know there's resources for that type of thing, but I'm a strong advocate of mentorship as well. I know I've had several mentors over the course of my life that have kind of helped me steer myself, in the right direction. And even though I know I started that as an adult, I know that could help in the areas of, in teenagers or even preteens, to actually have a path to try to, because if you're just going off of just whatever and you kind of like shifting in the wind based off of what's happening in your life, it allows, space for you to go off track, not really knowing that you're going off track. But if you have a path set aside, that, okay, I'm supposed to be headed in this direction. What can I do to get, after I fall off the wagon? Is there anything like that of that's within the, communities as far as mentorship for that age group to keep them kind of in the right direction?
Yes. I mean, there's several organized mentorship programs. There's some programs for at-risk youth who've been involved in the criminal justice system. There's some programs for girls that need mentorship. I think the Dolores Bar Weaver Foundation in Jacksonville has a program called See the Girl, and they mentor girls.
Okay.
You have the Big Brothers, Big Sisters programs in Jacksonville. The Jacksonville Jaguar has some type of mentor program. And you have, I'm trying to think, I can't remember her name. I'm ashamed I can't remember her name. But Miss Young, she's a mentor that works with a lot of our students at Edward Waters. They intern with her, and they mentor students. They mentor young students that are involved in the criminal justice system. So they get a college senior as a mentor for a semester. They meet with that student in public places like McDonald's or whatever and talk to them like once a week, ask them about their grades. They invite them on campus for football, basketball games, different things like that, to try to, be a positive role model for them. But I think a lot of times most natural mentorships occur naturally because the people personalities have to kind of mesh. And unfortunately in our community, we haven't really talked about or valued mentorship as a way to being successful or the way to reduce crime. But I would argue that that's one of the best ways, is because most of these kids are looking for somebody to look up to. They're just looking up to the wrong people.
Right? Because they're going within their neighborhood, their community, which, if they're in that community, most likely than not, they're, it's still possibly poverty stricken, and they're making choices that may or may not be in the best interest for the child to even be looking up to in the beginning.
Well, I've had some mentors growing up that really, impacted me, formal and informal. I had a mentor, Dick Ross, from Macon, Georgia. He kind of mentored me. He was older. Kept me out of a lot of situations. When I was young in school, I could have went left. A lot of my friends went to the left.
Right.
He kind of like, no, you don't need to be doing that. Stay in school, keep playing sports, you'll be all right. Just talked me away from, the other crowd, doing the other crowd. Kind of took me under the wing, and shielded me from a lot of, the stuff I shouldn't have been involved. I'm glad he did. Right. And that was more of an informal mentorship, and we still talk to this day. Then in my education journey, I had a couple of mentors that stepped in and, and helped me understand how to navigate, the educational journey, because it's a journey. It's not, you don't just, shout out to anybody who got a degree, because they're not just handing out degrees. No matter what nobody tell you, they're not just handing out degrees. So you have to go through something to get that degree. And it's really important that you have somebody who can navigate you through that process and let you know that you're capable of doing it. But I think one of the things that, I'm looking at doing in the future is I have a program currently called the Mile Network, where I try to mentor young men specifically. I'm not turning away mentoring young females, but it's specifically geared towards young African-American males that want to go into law enforcement. Now, with the recent happenings up in Memphis, it sounds kind of bad, right now. But generally speaking, your community has less police abuse of power when you have members of the police department that are from that area and people who look like you.
Right.
Representation. And that's what my goal was. But one of the things I think I'm going to expand to is, just finding other people to work with me to mentor for all different types of occupation. Because one of the issues that we have, especially for African American males, is underemployment, right? We have underemployment because a lot of them haven't got the right advice, and they don't have job skills, and they're looking at applying to the wrong jobs, right? So it's important that they get mentors that can steer them in the right direction and kind of get them, say, hey, what about being a plumber? What about being an electrician? What about, going through apprentice program? Have you thought about the military? Have you thought about, driving trucks? There's a whole host of opportunities out there, not just going to college, to get a...
Because college isn't for everyone.
It isn't for everybody. And your return on investment may be low. With some degrees, you may only end up making $35,000, $40,000, for 4-year degree. So you have to be intentional. But a lot of that comes from the young men seeing people who are in the field and having some success stories from them.
Well, I definitely want to thank you for I just got a brain freeze right there.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
I want to just thank you for being a part of the Butterfly Effect today. Before we close out, if you could let the audience know, because there might be some people that might be interested in the program that you are starting. Let them know how they can be able to find you and reach out to you, because to me, it definitely does start with the men. The men are the foundations of any family, and to me, given the right guidance, they can also be able to catch on quicker, when it comes to grasping a hold of what it is that they want to be doing for the rest of their lives, and not only being, active in their community, but, if you care about something, you tend to want to see that thing flourish. And if they're active in the community, especially with that particular program that you're talking about, that's key too. I mean, because we don't want a situation for Memphis and no other thing. We want it to be where you're talking to someone that's helping you develop your character, because I believe that particular situation was based off of some relationship stuff that didn't have anything to do with policing, but that's a character thing. And sometimes one-on-one we just need to be held accountable for our actions before it even gets to that point. But if you could just let the audience know how they can be able to contact you, Dr. Davis, on that program.
Okay. Well, you can reach out to me. My email address is Dr. Ken Davis. That's DRKEN Davis 23 at gmail.com. Dr. Ken Davis 23 at gmail.com. The name of the organization, the nonprofit I have, is milenetwork.org. Milenetwork.org. Or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Dr. Kenneth Davis on LinkedIn. So you can follow me on there. So I really enjoyed coming to talk. And I think it's important that we continue to have this dialogue and look at how we can try to, reduce unnecessary violence in our community.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Butterfly Effect.